David, welcome back to our show here. It's Friday, and of course, that means that you and I will be talking for almost 2 hours today. We've started this, I think, really great convention of beginning the conversation here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and all of these diverse platforms that we utilize. And of course, people can join us at 2 p.m. Eastern on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, David. How are you there in British Columbia?
I'm very well, Jason. Nice to be with you.
As always, nice to be with you as well, David. You know, you and I are really engaged in a method that's quite unique, and it seems that there are an array of dullards that we've accessed via the internet who have a difficult time either listening or hearing or reading or processing information because you and I say certain things and either they're hearing something else or they're trying to cause other people to think that something else was said. And before we get into our main topic today, which of course is going to be a remarkable juxtaposition that you've suggested involving the events that took place, was it 1997 when Diana died?
So the 31st of August.
31st of August in the tunnel, the Dalma, Place d'Alma?
The Pont d'Alma road tunnel. That's the Pont is French for bridge. Dalma is the name of the bridge. And there's a road tunnel underneath it along which I used to drive when I was working in Paris.
And of course, today we'll be talking about the bridge that could possibly connect those events to the events of 9/11. And the really amazing thing that you've done, David, is through this process of hypothetical speculation, we happen upon some amazing results. Now, some of these dullards who I'm referring to saw our broadcast last week where we asked the question, does a patented technology, namely the cordless phone created by George Henry Swigert, does that technology play a role in the police report made after the death of JonBenet Ramsey? Only a moron, a mental patient, or a fool could think that we would presume that George Henry Swigert participated in the actual murder. But your speculation about the technology of the cordless phone led us to the discovery that a phone call was made by Patsy Swigert on a cordless phone that would have been susceptible.
Patsy Ramsey.
Sorry, my bad, Patsy Ramsey. And thank you for also pointing out, David, sometimes speaking extemporaneously for hours per week, inevitably mistakes occur. So sometimes things are said that aren't exactly meant. But there's been quite a dust-up, David, and I'm intrigued by the discovery that was made through these hypothetical suggestions, which is that the police actually heard more of the phone call from Patsy Ramsey than what Patsy Ramsey intended. And that was a fact that I never knew about before the speculation that you offered.
No, and that's the amazing thing, because I think what you and I, with our gifts, if you will, or our challenges or our handicaps, we've developed something which is totally unique for online hosting of shows and interviews, which is the opportunity for online discovery, which I want, and I believe we're slowly succeeding to share with injured communities, because we can in fact find something that would enable them, I believe, to put together an action in the civil claims court for wrongful death. Now, you know, the idea of the cordless phone, it wasn't until this Mr. Swigert was telling you about the cordless phone, or we checked into George H. Swigert was an inventor. And let me just make, whether they're being dullards or disingenuous, I don't know. Let me just put my cards on the table, right? I'm an inventor, and I think I'm a very good engineer. At least other people, they may rate my common sense fairly low, but they do accept that I'm a fairly capable, original thinker. And I invented two systems in the 1980s, the deductive computing machine, which uses deductive logic to analyze physical events, and the object-oriented fractal paintbrush, right? Now, I ran out of money to develop both of those, so they become what are called stranded intellectual property. But having continued, 40 years later, I realized that every inventor is extremely vulnerable to being coerced, to being scared, to be intimidated, to be blackmailed, to whatever. Now, I say nothing about the quality of George H. Sweigert's inventiveness. I think he was an incredibly capable guy, and his sons should be extremely proud of him. They should also recognize the respect that people like myself hold for someone like George H. Zweigert. And it does his memory great disrespect to misinterpret what we're saying and allege that he might be involved. Well, he died in 1999, 2 years after little JonBenet Ramsey was murdered. Actually, she was tortured to death. Let's not underplay what was done to that poor little girl.
Yeah.
So I start from the premise that anyone who's invented anything in a legitimate way deserves our great respect. Now, how that invention is used or misused becomes extremely important when we're talking about high-value target or mass casualty events, right? So what I've been able to do, and it comes back to online discovery, is take that cordless phone and just Google, and that was, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, Google cordless phone and JonBenet Ramsey. And lo and behold, and I'd never seen it before, so that was only 2 days ago, apparently Patsy Ramsey, when she thought she had hung up on her call to the dispatcher or the 911, where she was begging for help because she was reading a kidnap note, apparently the dispatcher, the 911 dispatcher, and the police, I presume they were patched together in some way, they heard voices continuing after Patsy Ramsey had hung up. Now, what does that mean? That means probably the cordless phone was the subject of a man-in-the-middle attack. Someone had intercepted or got in between the call that should immediately have provoked a visit from the FBI, because it's the indication through the kidnap note of a child of tender age being taken away, in which case they might go interstate, in which case the Boulder police would not have jurisdiction. At no time during that day was the FBI called. And that's because I think there was a man-in-the-middle attack, and they wanted to make sure that only a local cop, actually her name was Detective Arndt, Linda Arndt, she's the one with the googly eyes, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a little video that says, "I know who killed JonBenet. I know who killed JonBenet," right? Well, she may very well know, but it wasn't the father, right? Mm-hmm. So moving on, now we come to your brilliant collage and 911. And as you said earlier, maybe we have a connection between the events in the Pont d'Alma road tunnel, where poor little Princess Di was obviously badly injured, but it was a survivable accident. And unconscionably, the combined forces of the French police and the French aid médical, or whatever it was, took 1 hour, 45 minutes to get the poor woman from a place in the tunnel into a hospital where they did an x-ray to find out that she had a hemorrhage, a small, I guess it's small, I'm not sure they use that word, in her pulmonary, is that the way you pronounce it? Pulmonary, right? Yeah. And they sutured it and fixed it, right? She had a low quality heartbeat, but apparently all of the experts said this was a survival accident. And the French police were lying about a whole range of things in a way very similar to the way the FBI lied its way through 911 and the subsequent investigation. Right? Over to you.
Well, it's, again, you're always moving at such remarkable speed, David. Your mind is amazing. But just to further complement your method, I mean, the mere speculation about the cordless phone led to your Google search that led to evidence in the JonBenet Ramsey murder. Here's an article I just found that said, did you know the first cordless phone was invented in Seattle? So I don't know what that's about. We'll have to read this, but I don't think this has anything to do with George Henry Zweigert, but it's an interesting bit of technology to speculate about. And perhaps that's all we need to say about that. But there are a lot of people who want to mislead people and malign the work that you and I are doing. They want people to think that the Federal Bridge is merely a bank processing, credit card processing mechanism. But it's amazing to me how you've pointed out all of the strange occurrences and participants in this Federal Bridge, this public private key infrastructure. And I think it's also worth repeating that this infographic describes a mechanism through which private, even classified, top secret information can be exchanged among all these parties over a public infrastructure like the internet. So in other words, someone at, let's say, Lockheed Martin could have a secure, encrypted communication with someone in the state of Illinois or the Department of Justice.
Or the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, which nominally responsible for the atomic weapons establishment, which in its wisdom has farmed out or outsourced the operation of the atomic weapons establishment to Serco and Lockheed Martin. I mean, you know, where do these guys get their imagination? It's obviously not between their ears.
Well, but the thing that's interesting is, you know, last night, David, I had a remarkable guest join us on Kevin Shipp's program. And while we're on this topic, I should remind our viewers, David, that the upcoming show at 2 p.m. is a sponsor-only show available to our subscribers who sponsor the program on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and of course on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. Reverse CSI storyboards is David's page, and I'm quite pleased with the system that I've been able to develop after many years of having startup companies and dealing with all the issues of new technology and the competitive nature of business and the complications of managing employees and paying people, etc. I think we've come up with a really excellent method whereby each of the guests that participate with me in this Only on Patreon program have their own Patreon pages, as you do, in this case, patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. And what this does is it allows our paying sponsors, all of the viewers who join us daily on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, it allows the sponsors to also sponsor my co-hosts, and it creates a really unique, sort of decentralized startup company. And it's an excellent way for us to have a business, for everyone who participates to be financially compensated, and for the audience to decide how well the company does. So one of the guests that we had last night on the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp was a very accomplished author named Diana West. And she pointed out that she had learned over the years of writing books about Iran-Contra and some of the most amazing infiltrations of the U.S. government. She speaks about how the communist Soviet Union infiltrated the U.S. government. A remarkable woman and fantastic author. But she said that you can sort of tell by these disruptions, you know, they reveal themselves. So when someone goes so far out of their way to troll me, as it were, we're coming up on 2 years here, and to convince our viewers, David, that this federal bridge, unlike what you've been telling us, that this is a key to so many of the massive, horrendous crimes in terms of mass casualty events and high-value target events. This is the key to that. There are other people who are making a lot of noise about how people should not pay attention to this, and frankly, that just makes me think it deserves more of our attention.
Yeah, well, they say that you know you're over the target when you're getting flack, but I just want to underline my compliments to you in putting that formula together where I and your other guests can independently generate revenues for our creative work. And I think we've made enormous progress together. And I just want to send a signal to the people who are sniping either at you or at me. For example, I've been told that I went after the money and that's why I lost my commitment to Able Danger. I contributed years of detailed research at no cost to Able Danger. And I believe that contribution, that technical contribution, is still on the books. I'm finding it bitterly disappointing to see how Able Danger is going off at a tangent with ad hominem attacks to various people, when at least the contribution I made initially, I defined or described what I was doing as cloud-centric crime scene investigation. And that still applies to this day. So when I'm being interviewed with you, it's exactly the same process. What I admire about you, Jason, is that you bring the best. Well, I think you bring the best out of me, and through your collages and your visual displays, I think it makes it so much clearer. I mean, I have the effect on a lot of friends that I start talking on my passions and their eyes glaze over. In fact, my late wife fell asleep in a community theater where I was performing as a comic actor, but she said my voice was so soothing, right? So I might have a soothing voice, but when I hit, the gas pedal, so to speak, I can go up into, as you know, 12 dimensions. But to return to this schematic, it is not just a credit card type of token arrangement. It's the ability, and it was invented at the GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters,
Wow.
in the United Kingdom in the late 60s and 70s. It was shared, this encryption technique, where you can send secure information over insecure networks between friends, I believe at a very early stage with the NSA, the National Security Agency. But they didn't go public because they wanted to conceal the fact effectively that the United States and the United Kingdom were engaged in what was called originally in 1942, I think, the Central Communications Electronic Board. So if you go down on the schematic, down on the left there, you'll see UK MOD, CCEB, I think.
Root.
And the root key. Now, if you have the root key to the public key infrastructure, you control communications between the various trusted parties, and you are in a superb position for what is known as a man-in-the-middle attack. So with this federal bridge, on 911, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense was in a position to launch a man-in-the-middle attack on the United States. Now, does that mean every Brit was interested in attacking the United States? Of course not. There is a small group of extremely corrupt and dangerous and powerful people within the United States, the United Kingdom, and the other the Five Eyes countries, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, that have determined to overthrow the sovereign governments of those 5 countries. And on 911, it was the first attempt at a coup d'etat, I believe, with people inside the United States. Now, going back, if you scroll up a little bit on your schematic, you'll see the Veterans Affairs, State of Illinois, and Department of Justice. Now, I believe David Swigert is a vet. Is that correct?
As far as I know, he's told us that he's been in the Air Force and was captured by the Sandinistas, and his revelation of that fact led me to ask him what he was doing in Nicaragua, because my only understanding of any U.S. military involvement with Sandinistas and Contras in Nicaragua was the drug smuggling related to Iran-Contra. I simply asked the question, is that what he's telling us? That he was working for a CIA drug smuggling operation? Then he seems to think I've accused him of that. I'm just asking him questions about his own revelations.
Well, perhaps he's overly sensitive. I would have asked him, why did the Sandinistas let you go?
That's an even better question.
Right. But then maybe, well, anyway, I don't want to be personal. Now, so obviously, well, Field McConnell is a Marine Corps vet, right? Mad Dog Mattis is a Marine Corps vet. Various other illustrious military people around Donald Trump have been veterans and have served extremely capably. But you see, then I come back to these man-in-the-middle attacks, and I ask myself, why does Serco have a contract for digital fires instruction at the Marine Corps base Camp Pendleton, which, as you know, in these recent forest fires in the immediate vicinity of the Marine Corps base at Camp Pendleton, there have been major fires breaking out, and there are no coincidences, Jason. These are signals that go to some of the bravest people in the world, right? I believe John Bennett Ramsey, the father of little John Bennett Ramsey, was a highly considered Navy pilot, I believe. George Bush, of course, is a military pilot and a very capable one. He showed great leadership qualities. But the kind of people who cluster around the Bernardine Dawns, the Hillary Clintons, the Michelle Obamas of the world loathe and despise people in uniform, right? Because they're considered to be part of that pantheon of male chauvinist piggery, etc., etc. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but well, I don't generally. So going back to Serco and this federal bridge, on the morning of 9/11, the Ministry of Defense, British Ministry of Defense, would have outsourced to Serco what is known as a resilience training exercise. So if you go to Hawk Hills in the UK, I think it's in Yorkshire, Serco has been given what is known as resilience training to the United Kingdom Cabinet Office, right? And what they do is Serco, it borrows government networks and it simulates or injects a media play for an emergency and tests the abilities of public servants to respond in an appropriate manner to a simulated emergency.
Sort of like a port of entry closing in Charleston, South Carolina, perhaps? A simulated event?
You've got it. You've got it. Or in an exercise called Amalgam Virgo on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, where this long-bearded wonder allegedly hanging out in a cave in Afghanistan straddling a yak is supposed to have led an attack on the United States using a hijacked aircraft, hijacked over Alberta, flying south over Abbotsford, continuing south, turning east, and in the exercise, it shows it's targeting the Capitol building. This is the 1st and 2nd of June.
Yeah.
That's Amalgam Virgo. But what that means, that was a full dress rehearsal to find out if the Americans would be dumb enough, right? And I'm not pulling any punches, dumb enough at the end of an exercise, which is determined when the war game maestro finds that the red attack team has got within 3 minutes of target, or the blue defense team has kept the red team out of 3 minutes of target. As I understand from Field McConnell, he says, knock it off on all channels, right?
Who says knock it off?
The war game maestro, the guy organizing it, the entire war game.
How do we know that? I've come to doubt much of what Field McConnell says.
Well, it seems logical, because how else do you end a war game? You've got to have some mechanism. There's a red team, right? There's a blue team. The red team is trying to get to the targets. In the case of Amalgam Virgo, it was the Capitol building. So someone has to say, well, who wins? And obviously you don't want the red team to go all the way through to the target and knock it out, which would have been the Capitol building. What you're supposed to be doing is to determine whether or not the blue team can handle an ad hoc imputation of a waypoint and respond appropriately. And then afterwards, there's supposed to be a briefing session. I have no reason to doubt Field McConnell in that regard. I also have no doubt of his logic that there's supposed to be an on-scene commander, right, that eyeballs what's actually going on to determine or communicate with the war game maestro that it's either the red team or the blue team has won.
Well, just to pause you for 1 second, David, I like to encourage not only the viewers, but myself, to question everything. Like, for instance, this document, this PDF, amalgamvirgo.pdf, when you first showed it to me, I found it amazing, but I also found it curious that, you know, it has, I'm looking for that image of the six-pack of Budweiser beer, because I found that so strange. There it is.
There it is.
I found it so strange that a military document would include this. So I just immediately began questioning, well, how do we know that this is a real document? How do we know that this Amalgam Virgo exercise was real? And it's not a matter of me doubting you, David. It's a matter of me wanting to apply a healthy degree of skepticism to anything that we examine, because who knows? These things could be faked. There's a lot of people trying to fool us all the time. There's a lot of people presenting false information and claiming that it's evidence. And our friend Field McConnell has recently done that with regard to accusations of me flying drones in Chernobyl, which never happened, and they haven't presented adequate evidence. I have, since we've started talking about it, seen a video recording of some congressional testimony where members of Congress referred to this training exercise, Amalgam Virgo, and were questioning Department of Defense individuals about it specifically. So that gave me good confidence that not only your research was valid, but it was a real and true event. Let me also take you back for 1 minute, because you were talking quite a bit about GCHQ having created this public-private key infrastructure. I think we should remind everyone who's watching about the significance of GCHQ. Bill Binney has separately told me that GCHQ and NSA are in fact one in the same. They are linked inexorably, not a matter of them cooperating, but rather coexisting as one unit. And it should also be mentioned that the very existence of GCHQ was not revealed until 1976. I believe it was Duncan Campbell and Mark Hosenball, unfortunate name for that man, but this is a highly secretive agency that basically the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom didn't want the general public to know about. So I find it interesting that Mr. Swigert, one of the primary antagonists of this information, wants people to think that it's ridiculous that you and I are speaking about Serco, a company that's been involved in all kinds of controversies in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, this prisoner transport controversy. What was the story with that?
Well, so Serco provides a prisoner escort service inside the United Kingdom. It operates jails in Australia and New Zealand. It's been obviously, for me, twinned with the Con Air project launched by Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister. Now, let me say something. I have great admiration for Field McConnell, but I briefed him very soon after our meeting, doing a little bit of research on his sister about how dangerous she was. And he said, that he even used words that he'd be quite happy to pull the lever and hang her. The fact remains is she's still out there, right? So as far as I'm concerned, you either talk the talk or you walk the walk. I've continued with this focus on the sister, and let me come back to the Princess Diana. I believe it was a murder in Paris in 1997, and the attacks of 9/11. The fact is that the marks in the road indicate that the Mercedes S280 was yawing prior to hitting the pillar, and yawing is rotation about an axis. I think in aircraft or a boat, I think that's well understood, pitch, roll, and yaw. But there were no brake marks on the road beside the pillar. They found 21% carbon monoxide in the blood tests of Henri Paul, the chauffeur of Princess Diana. No one has an explanation for how that level of carbon monoxide could get into the bloodstream. But going back to what Field discovered and the good research we did at Able Danger, we found going into the patent office that either Boeing or its associates have developed what is called ATI, which I think is automatic tranquilizer injection gas to deal, which is one way of dealing with hijacks. And I think it says in the patent that it's you can inject non-toxic gas and lull the passengers or the hijackers or the pilots into sleep. But what happens if you injected carbon monoxide in a pressurized container somewhere near the floor of where Henri Paul was driving? So he'd take a few breaths of a very high level of carbon monoxide, and that would make him dizzy or giddy and disoriented, right? Which might explain why he didn't put the brakes on.
David, how much carbon monoxide did you say was found in Henri Paul's blood?
21%, which is huge.
But do they talk about it in terms of parts per million? Do we know anything about that?
I don't know what units there were, but whether, that is the assertion. I don't know whether it's parts per million. Obviously, when the gas comes out of solution, it turns into enormous
well, I mean, we should
volume.
consult a doctor because this is an interesting aspect. Perhaps I could call Thomas Rudd. He's a clinical pathologist, but I just Googled and found this, how much carbon monoxide is too much, and this says 35 parts per million is the maximum concentration allowed by federal law for continuous exposure over an 8-hour period, and at 200 parts per million, you may experience mild headaches, dizziness, or even nausea after 2 or 3 hours. So, I mean, when you say 20% concentration in his blood, seems like a lot.
It would certainly, and that would imply that he's almost breathing in pure carbon monoxide, which would be consistent with the release of the gas through an automatic tranquilizer injection system, and that might be explaining it. But moving on, then you have, it would appear, a massive man-in-the-middle attack on the police and ambulance and hospital communication system that intended or succeeded in delaying the speed with which little Princess Diana got from the place of the accident into the hospital to get an X-ray, which determined there was a pulmonary lesion, which they sutured. But when she arrived at the hospital, her heart was still beating. So apparently the experts outside the people in Paris, the medical people who are too terrified to say what really happened, the general consensus is that that woman should have been taken straight to hospital. An hour and 45 minutes is unconscionable, right? And this comes back to my point about wrongful death. You can't, or it's fruitless to try and prove there was murderous intent, although there probably was. It's much more useful to say she died through wrongful death as a result of the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent patented devices, including the Motorola communication system or satellite solutions systems that may have been used by the people who arranged the delay. Now, I don't know what the French police use. Maybe it's Alcatel-Lucent or something like that. That's not my point. Motorola Solutions headquarters office is now in Chicago. That is to say, if you put the Motorola Solutions people head office together with the Boeing headquarters office, now Mr. Mueller should be spending a lot more time, at least when he's with the FBI, investigating the role of Boeing in the 9/11 attacks, when, after all, it's very obvious the Boeing aircraft were flown remotely. Because, as Field has said, and he's got 23,000 hours of flying experience, he said he couldn't fly a plane in those maneuvers like a large passenger jet. And there's one very good reason. Boeing passenger aircraft, like most passenger aircraft, they're only allowed, I believe, to go above 250 knots, above 10,000 feet. The plane that hit the Pentagon, or whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, was doing 500 miles an hour at 15 feet elevation. Now, the air for a wing flap to be moved around at that speed, at that elevation, it would get ripped off, right? So no human being could have been maneuvering the plane or the weapons platform that hit the Pentagon at 500 miles an hour and 15 feet elevation. Therefore, they didn't. It had to be flown by technology.
Well, David, there's an even better piece of evidence to support that hypothesis. Although I appreciate Field's input as a pilot, his erratic behavior and penchant for promoting falsehoods lately causes me to question anything and everything that he says. That becomes an element of evidence, but even more compelling evidence, I believe, is a video analysis of all of the videos of the last 12 seconds of flight of the aircraft that hit World Trade Center 2 that shows a final correction 12 seconds before impact and a perfect arch into the building. We've had multiple professional aviators tell us and testify otherwise on video that this is strictly impossible, and that is prima facie evidence of a calculated trajectory versus one flown by human pilots. Now, David, we're getting close to the end of our session here. Very soon we'll be going over to Patreon, so I want to remind our viewers that they can catch the main discussion on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and also on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I really want to encourage our viewers to sponsor both channels. Of course, I couldn't do this show without David, and after Field McConnell told David and I that he would be doing far fewer broadcasts, Field encouraged David to carry on broadcasting with me. So I'm perplexed that he is now poisoning the Able Danger audience against Crowdsource the Truth by misrepresenting the facts of what actually occurred. So it's very important to me that we stick to the facts and tell the truth. I don't know why Field McConnell insists on perpetuating that particular lie and refusing to speak to me about it, but I've noticed something else very interesting that becomes possibly a coincidence. Perhaps we're on our way to a pattern. We've got the son of George Henry Swigert, David George Swigert, antagonizing just relentlessly. Now recently, the son of the possible scam artist I think he might be a scam artist. Evidence indicates he might be a scam artist. One of the creators of the Chicago Climate Exchange, along with the definite scam artist Al Gore, I'm talking about Richard Sandor. Well, his very aggressive relative named, Shelley Sandor, has taken to trolling the show and insulting me. I had no idea who this person was until, David, you explained to me the carbon dioxide carbon credit scam. And when we started talking about this, a close relative of the creator of the Chicago Climate Exchange starts coming in here posting insults. So I also want to remind everyone that when they're watching Crowdsource the Truth, if they see this type of troll activity, the best counter-troll method we can come up with is not to block their comments or have moderators, but anytime someone sees a troll like Sherry Sandor or any of the other trolls that are coming in here, you should just send a payment, either become a sponsor of patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, or send a one-time sponsorship payment to paypal.me/crowdsource the truth. But be sure to let that troll know that you're sending that financial sponsorship to counteract their trolling behavior. David, I think this is the only thing that will really stop these trolls and allow us to focus on the important information that you're bringing forward.
Well, I think that's true, and equally, I second your point. You've made that several times. I'm immensely grateful for the financial support. It allows me to continue to function. What I would also like to see is that people who are making financial support ask their friends to join on the Patreon page and support us, because my ambition, it's not so much the money, it's the possibility of having a viral movement get behind this idea of online discovery in crime scene investigations, where your gift is to put up the structures and the images, and we get momentum, and it's impossible for the bad guys to stop us, because we've woken up, let's say, the court of public opinion, and we've given the court of public opinion the tools of online discovery and reverse engineering. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm just very focused on people being extremely skeptical and scrutinizing everything. You know, it's interesting, David. I had someone who got a spam email on an email address that they use with their Patreon account, and they just jumped to the conclusion that Patreon is selling their information and that they're going to leave Patreon. So I just had a little private email back and forth with this person. I was curious to know. I'd like to know if Patreon is doing that, because we're also trying to evaluate what's going on with Patreon, this whole deplatforming thing, and people have been reluctant to join Patreon. A lot of people have left Patreon. Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going on there, but when I just had a brief conversation with this person and said, "Are you 100% sure that Patreon sold your information? Have you ever used this email address anywhere else?" And after 5 minutes of research, the person discovered that they had used it somewhere else, and through a variety of other things they were able to research, they determined that this other platform had sent the email. So they had falsely accused Patreon and jumped to a conclusion. I fear this may be what many people have done in the matter of Carl Benjamin being blocked from Patreon and removed from Patreon. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that that's Patreon's fault. Perhaps someone else played a role in doing that, and Patreon's doing a very good job for us as far as enabling this network where you're paid independently by our sponsors, I'm paid independently by our sponsors, and we're able to carry on like this. So the Patreon show this afternoon, David, at 2 p.m., just about 21 minutes from right now, we're going to focus very closely on this amazing juxtaposition that you've put together for this week, which is the accident in the Porte d'Alma tunnel in Paris, and how technological signatures link that to certain unique events that occurred on September 11th in 2001. So before we wrap it up in the next 5 or so minutes, David, what do you want to take us out with here to just give people a flavor of where we'll be going with this conversation in 21 minutes?
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. So on the 19th to the 21st floor of building number 7, the Salomon Smith Barney, building is a company called ITT Hartford Insurance. Now, ITT has a patent effectively for droning vehicles, cars, with a master car going ahead of it and imputing, let's say, ad hoc waypoints into the steering mechanism of the car that is, so to speak, electronically tethered to it, right?
So
that
ITT owns that Hartford Insurance Company?
ITT, they may have spun that off because ITT had a number of companies, also including Exelis, Exelis. And people can Google a video, I think you showed it in the last show, Exelis ATM, I think air traffic management, which shows a simulation of a plane loading up a mobile transport radar system, flying off to a place that looks vaguely like Afghanistan. I've never been to Afghanistan, but it's sort of desert environment. And then a military engagement or mission is put underway where the Exelis system imputes ad hoc waypoints into the flight of the fighters or the bombers that are running surveillance over Afghanistan. Now, this would be exceedingly useful if that technology was used for the ambush of Extortion 17, where I think the SEAL team that was allegedly responsible for taking out Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, right? Where little Barry Soetoro, or Barack Hussein Obama, as he's well known, promptly puts a bullseye or a target on the back of the SEAL Team 6, and that's totally unheard of. He goes and congratulates them, right? Now, what that did, of course, it gave an excuse for these deep, dark forces to target SEAL Team 6, and a whole bunch of them were gathered together on a CH-47, I think it was, a Boeing aircraft, and was ambushed in Afghanistan, and they all died together with the dog named Bart, I think it was. Now, that's a high profile that the likes of Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama and Barack Hussein Obama or Barry Soetoro and these characters that hang around with Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers, I think they love this. You know, you got soldiers, brave people going into harm's way, and you kill them all, right? Now, going back to Chicago, so what have they got by way of the equipment necessary to ambush a Boeing CH-47 aircraft, non-modified? Well, you've got Boeing headquarters that set up shop, so to speak, I think on the 4th of September of 2001, at about the same time as Robert Mueller becomes the director of the FBI. Right now, what that tells me is that Robert Mueller would have known or should have known or could have known about the Federal Bridge, right?
He knows about it.
Right, that there were a number of entities on the Federal Bridge going into this war game exercise where I think the Federal Bridge members are engaged in a, whether the senior people know or not, a pay-to-play operation. That is, if you pay the right amount of money to the right kind of people, you get a fiber optic link into the Federal Bridge, which gives you real-time communication to, for example, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense and its proxy, which is Serco, for the war games of 911. And then all that you need is to clip in the ITT patented devices so you can put a Mercedes S280 into a yaw maneuver before it strikes the pillar, the 13th pillar in the road tunnel under the Pond Armour Bridge, just as you can put in a plane allegedly flown by this guy Mohammed Atta before it goes into, I think that Mohammed Atta, I think he did the North Tower. I forget the name of the guy who did the South Tower.
Hani Hanjour.
Yeah, I think that was Pentagon. But anyway, we can check that.
None of them actually did it, so it's...
Yeah, exactly. That maneuver, that what Field McConnell tells me is there is a no check turns in the maneuver where the plane was put through a very complex pitch, roll, and yaw. Otherwise, it would have missed the South Tower. That had to be done by technology of the type provided by ITT. So on the 19th to the 21st floor of building number 7, potentially, ITT linked to the 25th floor, which is staffed by the Department of Defense, the CIA, and the IRS. could link back to the Pont d'Armor Road Bridge. So this idea of reverse engineering, let's get those ITT people, find out what they were doing on the 31st of August 1997 and what they were doing on the September the 11th of 2001, and see if their technology could have been used with their knowledge or without it, right, for the wrongful deaths of Princess Diana and the 3,000 or the 343 firefighters who died in ambushes, repeat ambushes, in Towers 1 and 2, because when Tower 2 came down, the Motorola Solutions radio systems should have been used to evacuate or order the evacuation of the firefighters in the North Tower. So my point is, please, if you're a relative of any firefighter in New York that died, or you have an interest in support or join, Jason Goodman and myself, and we'll explore the possibility that those firefighters died as a result of the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of patented devices, and then sue the hell out of the custodians, which is Serco and its shareholders.
And of course, we're going to do that. We're going to do that anyway, David, but we certainly will be able to sustain it and hope that people who enjoy the show and want that justice to be served will sponsor the channels. I hate to interject, David, but it's time for us to wrap up this broadcast and go over to patreon.com. I just wanted to fill in the blank here. The official story says that United Airlines Flight 175 was piloted by Marwan al-Shehi, but I doubt that. So, David, I want to thank you, and we'll be speaking again in just about 13 minutes on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and of course patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors. We'll see you there at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching, everybody.